Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for this generous introduction. I always think that all that has been mentioned belongs to history. If you go to an employer, they will say, I don't mind what you've done in the past. I want to know what you can do in the future. And I think that is perhaps also supported by the science of learning. And that is the title of my presentation. I know we are rushed for time, so I'll cut off all the humorous and the interesting parts and go to the... Is that good? But this is Hong Kong. When they say, why don't you have innovation? I have no time. I have to cover the syllabus. 教唔晒書啊. Right? And that is perhaps what we have to gradually move away from. What I'm presenting might be repeating what I did before, and many of you may have heard it. And that reminds me of a story. I was in a village called Sturbridge in Massachusetts, US. It's a tourist place that lives the life of 1836. So I played a student and attended class, and after that I asked for textbooks. I got one textbook. It's Code of Practice. There are 108 codes of practice. One thing that stuck in my mind is when you hear old people repeating the same story, don't laugh. So if you heard that what I'm talking about is repeating what I said, don't laugh. I used to say the ultimate aim of education is to prepare young people for the future. Agree? But last week I was in Chicago attending the 100th anniversary of John Dewey's visit to China, which was very influential, and just found that he said, education is not preparation for life. He said, education is life itself. It's so true. It's so true that it also applies to school lives, and I think it is totally supported by my understanding of science of learning. So I'll try to, science of learning is, I'll go through this. So I'm not a neuroscientist because science of learning is all the past theories and experience of teaching and learning underpinned by neuroscience. We used to have educational research either as a process from A to B and try to have pre-test, post-test, and see what's the change. You call it behavioral change. Or we use a control group and the experimental group and try to compare with the same process which one is more effective. But what actually happened between A and B is a black box. Our experiences, many of them are very precious. But neuroscience had added color to that and tried to explain, to crack the black box and see what is actually happening between A and B, the process. That's why it attracts me. I'm a policy person. I have nothing to do with language research, but I found that as a policy person, if education is about learning, if you don't understand learning, how can you talk about policies? And that is my fundamental approach. And I still feel it's so essential because it's like a restaurant boss who don't understand, who's not a gourmet, doesn't like to eat, then how can you run a restaurant, right? How can you run an education system without understanding what learning is about? Unfortunately, human understanding of learning is very little and only recent. But all the cases that help to illustrate science of learning, a large percentage about language. So I have the benefit of research from elsewhere, from other people, and try to present to the experts here my humble understanding of learning. Why learning? Why learning? Learning has been with us for such a long time, taken for granted. What at this point we suddenly have to turn to learning? A few reasons, but one of them is this. Society has changed. society has changed so much that our university graduates or young people will experience a lot of different jobs, different circumstances, different occupations, different challenges, and so on and so forth. Every minute they have to learn. Even the same post, in the same profession, the same job, they have to face changing environments, changing market, changing customers, changing partners, and so on and so forth. And so learning has become a daily necessity. Our young generation will face this. This is just repeating what I've said. Therefore, science of learning. Now, science of learning to me, I must introduce these two books. It's the same book, but last year the second edition came about. You can see from the subtitles, the first was about 20 years ago, Brain, Mind, Experience, and School. But now in the second one is Learners, Contexts, and Culture. I think it's a totally different perspective about learning. Although the first book, the first edition, was fundamental to many of us who begin to move into science of learning. I would not go to this. The science of learning is fundamentals about I'll try to reduce that into very simple principles. I take myself as a broker between scientists and practitioners, and hopefully to bring that to policymakers, although that is slightly less hopeful, but I try to do that. So human brains are plastic, and human activities shape human brains. This is my fundamental understanding. That is, human brains are changeable. But what changes human brains? Milk powder? That is on the advertisement, right? If you drink this milk powder, your child will become wiser. I don't think so. Getting stronger, more muscular, doesn't mean that you become an athlete. They're two different things. Right? You may have a healthy brain, doesn't mean that you have a clever mind. So, but human activities shape human brains. It's our activities, our own activities, shape our mind. I'll try to explain in 6 principles. There could be many, many other things. I know there are experts in the audience, so I'll try my best. This is one book that intrigued me and started my whole entry into science of learning. It's not about science of learning. It's about the brain that changes itself. I understand there's also a Chinese translation in the mainland. I'm not so sure how good is the translation, but this is intriguing. Intriguing. For example, one child has brain damage while during the infancy. And by that damage, it's estimated, is predicted he would be very poor in language. However, he went through the infancy and his language has no problem. Until when he went to schools, he faced arithmetic, mathematics. He had difficulties in mathematics. And that part of the brain was never damaged. People tried to study his brain and found that the part which is supposed for language, for mathematics, has been taken care to replace that part, the role of that part for language. That is, the part for mathematics is used to learn language. And therefore it has no problem in language, because language comes into the learning first. But when it comes later to mathematics, that part is already occupied. So he has weak mathematics. There are many, many examples in that book. Read it if you have time. Of course, I know you don't have time. So I try to translate my understanding into 6 principles. Hope that it will be simple enough. Principle, learning is meaning-making. A newborn child, many of you are moms, we used to believe that they can't see, they can't hear. So they are begin to develop some sights, begin some hearing power. But no, they can see everything. They can hear everything, except that they don't make sense. It's a whole bunch of things that doesn't make sense. So the over activities, human interactions, natural instinct, they grow an understanding. This is milk. This is mother's voice. This is mother's face. These are mother's eyes. This is mother's voice when she's happy. This is mother's voice when she's unhappy. Right? All these become concepts in the brain, and that is her knowledge, the baby's knowledge. This is how knowledge develops. When I come to this audience, I know very little about this audience. I know it is SCOLAR, but who are they? Only in the last presentation, I hear that, there could be parents. Right? There could be, I don't know, there could be research students. I don't know. It's through and I don't know what I'm going to speak will make sense to you at all. But when I see your reactions, some of you smiling, are not taking a nap, I feel that, yes, they are listening. Okay? And if they smile and they're not okay, they're supporting me, maybe I can go into that direction even more. And so on and so forth. This is my understanding, my knowledge. So it's meaning-making, from infancy to very old people. And therefore, we call it knowledge construction. It's rather academic terms, and people say, this is constructivism. But it's not an ism. It's not an ism. It's that your brain develops a concept out of data and so on and so forth. The language, you may turn to, I skipped that, you may turn to a science of learning scientist, Patricia Kuhl, K-U-H-L. She said that babies are actually doing statistical analysis. So over time, they'll pick up some of those which are statistically more frequent. And then they'll try to weaken those that are statistically weaker. And therefore, when you come to a newborn child, the brain is very, very heavily connected. But over time, the connection becomes rare, but thicker. That is, in language, they can learn a lot of languages, but at a certain time, they stick to the mother tongue, the more frequently used languages, and the other language connection become weaker. Now, connected to that is one important discovery by the learning scientists is learning the contact interaction with more languages is very good to a child. I can tell you one story. We were in Shanghai, Nancy Law, our professor, we are hosting a conference. The Vice Minister of Education in Norway came to me. He said, I must rush back this afternoon because after listening to Pat Kuhl's presentation, we have to change their mind. This afternoon, tomorrow, the parliament will decide that there will be no second language in primary schools. I said, this is wrong, so I must go home and tell them, right? So it's so important. There are many, many experiments to show that bilingual child are have more problem-solving abilities than monolingual. To a layman, my layman explanation is simple because they have the notion of options. They can express in two ways the same thing. And options are fundamental to decision-making. And decision-making is what problem-solving is about. So they are given options. And the monolingual child doesn't have that option because language is not only about sounds. It's not only the part of the brain that's taking care of sounds. It's meaning-making. Therefore, it also fires other parts of the brain that try to make meaning of the sound. Right? And for a bilingual child, they have two ways of expressing the same thing. The same sound may fire two different parts of the brain for different meanings. So they are working in a diversity, world of diversity. No, I spent too much time on this, but this is fundamental. This is fundamental. But what does that mean? The implication is that it's not receiving knowledge poured into the brain. We still think that the child's brain is like a container. They are supposed to be empty. And teacher's brain is full. Right? We siphon our knowledge into the child's brain. And then at the end, we test how much is the container full. It's 60% full, 60 marks. Right? 100% full is 100 marks. It doesn't happen like this. Doesn't happen like this. It's not absorbing. We say, let the child be absorbing knowledge like a sponge. This is a total misunderstanding. Right? So have to be active learners. That is why we say active learners. Where comes this? We always assume that, yes, they have to be active. And some people will say, what's wrong with passive? Right? If they're too active, it's called hyperactive. Right? And how can they absorb? So they have to sit there quiet and let me pump knowledge into them. So we have active learners. My understanding of active learner in brief is the first level is what we always said, motivation. To make them feel interested, to make them have ownership of the learning. Right? But this is still on things that we want them to learn. We set the path, we set the contents, we set the targets, and they have to go through that path. Otherwise, it's not our job. Our job is push you through the machinery, the production line. But a lot is already happening, particularly in higher education and also in some primary schools in Hong Kong, if choice. They should be given choice. Because knowledge is developed in their respective minds, so they should be given at least more than one path, more than one set of target goals, more than one set of contents. Choice. But what is lacking is space. Let's give them free space, autonomous space to develop their own learning targets, contents, and path. And that is perhaps, in Chinese, I say, 留白, 老白, like a Chinese painting. Those without the ink is also part of the painting. Right? You paint everything black, it's not a painting. We are doing that, actually. Right? So leave some room, leave some white space. But I have to say that these three are not mutually exclusive. It's not a zero-sum game. You still may have things that you want them to learn. You still have something you want to give them choice. And still have something that is out of your own imagination, they can go on their own. That is how a learner becomes active. I must rush because time is limited. The second principle is, therefore, almost following from first, is people learn differently. And that is killing for our school system. Right? We all assume that they are almost like a factory. They are raw materials into the same machinery, and they should, if I teach you the same, you should learn the same. Right? And in the end, I'll test you the same. And so they learn differently. And therefore, respect individual differences, but it's easier said than done. How? How? If everybody runs in their own directions, so what can I do? I can give you some examples how this can be done. Allow diverse learning paths, allow room for creativity, and so on. The third principle, learning as experience. Therefore, activities, experience is important. You have the experience of learning English, and you get high scores because you've learned testing in English. But you can't speak a word of English. a sentence of English because you have never learned using English. And the experience of classroom English and the experience of using English are two different things. Right? If you don't give them the experience, they don't learn. And that's simple, straightforward. But that relates to what do you expect them to learn? What do you expect them to learn? Yes, there's no objection to getting high scores, but what beyond high scores? What beyond high scores? Yes, I have to finish the textbook, the curriculum. But is the textbook opening or limiting their learning experiences? And that makes a difference. That makes a difference. Today, it's like this. You have a society of human resources which is diverse, right? You go to your students, past students, and ask them to give a name card. 10 or 20% of the time, you don't understand what it is. There are new occupations, new names for the company, right? Or they change their companies all the time. Diverse. We have also human beings who are diverse because they are born differently and they learn differently. However, between the two large continents, there's only one narrow bridge, which is education. Right? The few subjects, or now better known as learning areas, that they have to go through. No matter how good you are, no matter how interested you are in many other things, but you have to pass this narrow bridge. 獨木橋啊，獨木橋啊，right? Otherwise you fall. The downside of that is not only that they lack experiences, they also take the scores, the success in subjects, in the few subjects, as their own ability, as the proxy of their own ability, as their own values. So those who fail in the examinations think that they have no value. Those who are successful in those examinations thought that they have of high value. And there are two different things. Whether they have learned, they have enough experiences to face the future, or whether they know only very well those subjects, are two different things. And we have come to the stage that this has to be faced. In the past, it doesn't matter. I can tell you why. Not here. Unfortunately, some of you don't understand Chinese, so I will say it used to be 一紙文憑，一技傍身，一勞永逸，一帆風順，從一而終。所有一字嘅都得，冇加落去咪一成不變嗰啲唔好係㗎。Okay, yeah. It's basically one credential, one skill, and you have everything once and for all, and then you can be in a job, in an occupation for long, for good. Right? This is no longer a possibility, or a very few possibilities. So, broadening learning experiences, that is learning experience and so on and so forth. On Saturday, I'll be going to Chinese University, and they have a project which is indeed to increase students' experiences. I think this is doing in Hong Kong. Every school almost is trying to do that. If you are teaching in a school which is not doing that, I wouldn't say congratulations, that you have to do something. Principle 4, practice and understanding are intertwined. This is also another interpretation of the fundamental principle. We tend to think that understanding and application and using are two separate stages. Right? In science, I was a science student. You learn Newton's law on blackboard. In that time, there's no PowerPoint, there's no overhead projector. You have Newton's law number 1, Newton's law number 2. Right? And then you go to the laboratory to do experiments which are possible. Newton's law at that time was not possible to be tested. But you may have electricity, you have a Wheatstone bridge or whatever. Right? You think that you learn first. Then you apply. And the whole schooling system is like this. In schools, you learn. You learn in abstract. You learn in a purified situation. Right? You only deal with teachers. And then after graduation, you go to society. That is the reality. Then you apply. Right? This is absurd because people don't learn like this. Therefore, Hong Kong has seen this gradual merging of the actual reality of life and work to schooling. There was a survey in 2016 that every school is participating, is engaging in about 9.8 projects, which is partnering with outside bodies, not on curriculum matters, on all kinds of activities, right? And that is to be congratulated because organizations in community are helping us happily and effectively. And when I tell this to other people in other systems, they all admire us very much. What a society. They can help you. Are they willing to help you? Are they happy to help you? Yes, they are providing experiences. And they learn a lot. They learn a lot, may not be in the formal curriculum, may not be tested in DSE, but they learn a lot about how to be a human being, how to respect other people, how to respect real life work, how to be punctual, how to dress, how to be polite, how to deal with people, and so on and so forth. A lot of things they've learned. Therefore, we call it learning in context. Or otherwise, some of the learning scientists say this is a power of context. That is, without context, the learning is abstract. It's not effective. It's effective only for the examination, perhaps. Learning by doing, or I may even modify to say learning by using. You know, there's a group of parents who formed a LBD group, and they have about 12 schools who are practicing learning by doing. Half of the days, all the afternoons are for learning by doing, on all sorts of things, not in the curriculum. Of course, the teachers first panic. How can I finish the syllabus? How can I finish the textbooks? But they managed, and students learn even better in the formal part. Experiential learning, this is a buzzword now. Learning by experience, learning in context, and early experience in real life. I understand that this afternoon there will be a team from my own university, Professor Jessica, or actually Dr. Key here knows that. Foreigners, when they learn Chinese, the first encountered difficulty is the tones. Chinese is a tonic language. Most of the other languages, except one or two, which are very rare, are intonation languages. So when we say you have to learn Mandarin, for example, ba, 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 they feel puzzled. What is ba, 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 ba? Right? Because they have lost the faculty for tones. Okay, 5 minutes, that's more than enough. But the team has discovered that it's because it is out of context. Out of context, therefore, ba, 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 ba doesn't make sense. But if you go through in context, they can learn because they take it as a sound. Right? You labeling analytically as a tone, it makes things more difficult rather than easier. So I tried this in foreign occasions, as a keynote. I said, you don't understand Chinese, don't worry. Follow me. Mama. The whole audience said, Mama. I said, you've got 2 tones already. Right? It's in context. In context, things learn very, very easily. And there are many, many other experiences. For example, vocabulary. There's often a misunderstanding that vocabulary is more important, is the first thing to learn before you can go to texts. I think is a challenging, wrong assumption. In China, I have a few friends in China who try to learn more English. They use an app which you tell every day how many words you have acquired in English. And they reported very happily to me, today I've acquired 3,000. And the total, cumulative. So tomorrow he said, I'm having 3,400, right? Yes, I think that's true. But how do you learn that? Just by popping in the word, the sound, and a picture. In science of learning terms, it's out of context. And that is why there are quite a number of early childhood teachers here. You start with picture books with no words, there's story. Then you have simple words. They may or may not understand, doesn't matter. Then you do finger reading because the words, the sentences make sense only because of the story. Right? And after that, then you can go on with other learning and so on and so forth. That is a way of building your vocabulary. Your vocabulary is built in context. Of course, that is far more difficult. Instead of building many, many stories, you go the easy way of building vocabulary, single words, right? And so on. No, I won't elaborate before I'll offend anybody. Principle 5, learning is holistic, which is again another interpretation. Knowledge is often integrated. That is why kindergartens concentrate on play, although play is interpreted very differently among different people, but it's an integrated, holistic activity. But the problem with that is you cannot control what is learned. You can only vaguely think that these activities will allow them to learn in those areas. It's not analytic. This is a play for understanding politeness. This is a play to learn honesty. Well, sometimes it can be, but most of the time it's a holistic thing. It's give them a ground for them to develop. I learned a lot from my Mongolian friends. They came to Hong Kong in our summer institute from higher education. When we talk about education as plantation, right? We know the seed, we know the out product, the eventual outcome product. So we try to do whatever is possible, fertilizing, irrigation, and so on and so forth. Eventually, I'll get what I want, right? 中文叫做種瓜得瓜，種豆得豆啊。You want melon, you get melon, okay? But the Mongolians said that we don't do that. We are nomadic, right? We bring the sheep to good pasture, good grasses, and let them eat. This is our responsibility. Oh, some of them may eat well and become fat. Some of them may not eat well and become... Yes, that is another thing to tackle. But what can we do? Do we reap the grasses and then come to feed them? It's a different connotation, different notion. Therefore, people are talking about implicit learning. The European community is doing a lot on implicit learning. Actually, SCOLAR, several years ago, invited a professor from European. That's it, you learn implicitly and have a play. I will not elaborate because only 1 minute, I'm sorry. The last principle, learning is social cognition. It is not a single person's learning. It's learning with human beings. And I don't have the time to elaborate. You may, because what I know, you know, right? What I can get, you can get. I don't get this from laboratory. I don't get this from any special. There's a notion of mirror neuron that people and people have a kind of a mutual induction. For example, there's an experiment among the learning scientists. In America, there's a baby who's still crawling, about 7 to 9 years old. A Chinese lady from Beijing holding a huge, large picture book, telling a story to the baby. Right? The baby is not listening, the baby is just crawling still. But you test the baby's brain, it's very active. That is, the language is actually interacting with his brain, although he's not speaking at all. The same was videotaped, and the videotape was shown to the same baby, and test his brain, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Because human and human interaction is essential. Then you say, well, but then when I grew up, I watched television. I learned a lot from television. Yes, because when you're growing older, you got the proxies, you got the symbols. Language, alphabets, numbers, musical notes. That's it. You know that from this musical note, I know this is A, this is F. Right? From this word, I know it represents. So it's translating all these symbols into real knowledge. So you can build upon other people's knowledge. But for a simple child, if an infant, it doesn't make sense. So it's a process how to. There's a huge literature that's developed in the past 6 months about mirror neuron. Some may even claim that this is the fundamentals of human empathy, human sympathy, right? Yes. But time is limited. And therefore, discussion is fundamental in classes, debates, group work, and so on and so forth, collaborative learning. So I'll give you a few examples, giving you 1 extra minute or 2 minutes. Examples. One is, I will not do this. I will do this. An egg. Many of your schools are already doing this. This is from one school. Each primary one kid is given one raw egg. They are going to keep this egg for 2 weeks. And every day they have to do a 1-line diary about your feeling about the egg. Isn't that interesting? Primary one. So I feel very happy. But I feel worried. Right? And then some may have broken the egg. I say, I feel so sad, and so on. So I said, this is good. This is language. This is some expression. Right? But the teacher told me it's not only that. It's about life education. In the middle, the teacher said, why are you so worried about the egg? And the kid said, well, because there's a small chick inside, and I may kill the chick. Yes, there's a life there. You know now why your mother is so worried about you. It's life education. But that's not the end. At the end of 2 weeks, they tried to ask the primary one kids to do a birthday party for the egg. They're so happy because they are always receivers of birthday party. Now they are going to produce a birthday party. They discussed what music, what background, what backdrop, what cake to buy, and so on and so forth. Until they come to whom to invite. There's a huge debate. Some said, my grandpa, grandma should be invited. Others said, please don't. They will spoil the whole birthday party. And so on and so forth. You see, how rich is this learning experience? Right? You want writing, writing. You want reading, reading. You want music, music. But it's also decision making. It's also crisis management. It's all by students by themselves. Second example, Chinese vocabulary building. Right? This many of you have known, and I'll just repeat. This is from the Chinese team, and Dr. Qi knows this very well. Instead of giving a passage of 100 words, memorize, tomorrow you dictate. Right? 1 mistake, 5 marks deduction. Right? They give them a blank paper. In the middle, there's a theme. And they are going to give any vocabulary that's related to spring. A minimum of 6, no upper limit, as many as possible, 3 marks per word, but there's a promise that if you're wrong, I'll give you a cross, but will not deduct marks. That is essential. You want to encourage them to venture. Otherwise, they'll be very, very... So this is what comes up. And this young kid gets 159 marks. Okay? 100 marks. So what is difference from 100 words passage? This is, they call mental lexicon, active learner. They have to find. Now, you don't control how they find it. You can get it from a book, you can ask your parents, you can find it from anywhere, as long as you get it. Because you want to have the ownership. You own the process of finding the vocabulary. It's vocabulary building. It's a mental lexicon, because what you see here is exactly what happens in the brain when you remember vocabularies. They're all related. And it's individualized learning. Right? So it fits science of learning very well. However, it's a challenge to teachers. There's no control. If I have 100 words in the passage, I know tomorrow they will learn these 100 words. Now it's out of control. Everyone is going on his own. So what can I do? What can you do? Go back to passage? That's easy. The teachers ask the students to form groups of 5 and ask them, each group, to select 30 words, 30 characters for the whole class. There are 6 groups, 30 students. So the students begin to search for the 30. In that process, they are explaining to each other what they want to recommend. So it's an in-depth learning process. And when they display this 30 on the board, and there are 6 groups, they learn this 30 times 6, 180, are so deep-rooted in their mind, because you have to explain to people why we have chosen that. Right? Of course, for the teacher, they say, this is very tedious. How many lessons do I have to spend on this? But I will ask, do you prefer really marking whole night until 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock? Right? It's a different process, and the learning is totally different. Right? And therefore, they earn a lot of, I won't explain. Anyway, before the end of second grade 2, they learn more than 2,500 words. That's enough to read newspaper, or the primary 1 don't read newspapers. And primary 3, at the end of primary 3, primary 4, they can read Jingyong novels, right? That is what it's about. This is what I said. Oh yes, that's not the end. One teacher even said that that's not the end, we can still do more, because they have so many words around the table. So ask them to put all your characters, cut them into pieces, and spread them on paper, and try. Give you half an hour, and tell me how would you classify them, you were asked. So they try to classify. Sometimes, eventually, the character parts emerge. The 部首啊. Say, oh, this is up and down, this is left and right, and so on and so forth. The concept comes in. Right? So you can do a lot with just one dictation. Now this I will not repeat. Now this I will end with this one. This is from a very famous professor, Tan Lihai, who used to be our professor, but because Shenzhen is much richer than Hong Kong, he's now poached to Shenzhen. And he works on the brain activities in using and learning Chinese, using and learning of English, and try to compare. Of course, it confirms that they happen in different parts of the brain. And because Chinese and English are so different, they happen in rather distant parts of the brain. This is one. So it supports the whole notion that learning is not only about sounds. The sound part is almost the same. But he also found that Chinese learning part of the brain is more related to actions, to motor. And after a few more experiments, they found that this is very much related to Chinese writing, But that gives him the opportunity to raise a very, very important challenge. He works further on dyslexia of all languages and found that if the Chinese learning is more related to motor, then not writing Chinese characters will eventually damage their reading ability, and therefore would be the cause of dyslexia. And that is exploding. And his paper is quoted by over 100 other researchers around the world. And therefore, writing becomes so important. Right? This is commonly known. And the Westerners don't understand. Why are you doing this? Imitating all the time. The rote learning, this is rote learning. I will end by telling you my secret. Last year, in order to experiment learning, I learned from zero, Chinese calligraphy. I hate copying. Right? Now I understand the process is like this. Chinese, unfortunately. First of all, I don't understand what it is. 莫名其妙, 莫名其妙. Then I cannot control my hands, my fingers. Right? But then after practice, then it becomes a little bit more kind of familiar. This actually happens in all learning. Music, you do studies, right? Boring, rote learning. In sports, you do rote exercise, table tennis, right? Most of them start, but you can't stop there. That is the problem of Chinese learning in the past. You stop memorizing and repeat. This is rudimentary. But when you become more frequent, I interviewed a music professor in APA, Academy of Performing Arts. He said, this is what we call muscular memory. You have to remember it and take it for granted. When you see the note, you can take it for granted and play. You can't leave it without practice. When I saw a note and I try to think, what is this note? And then you play. You can't play that like that. It's like multiplication table. Right? Why multiplication table? Because without multiplication table, you cannot engage in real activity of multiplication. And how can you learn multiplication? It's not only a matter of reasoning. The reasoning can allow you to do activities. And activities will enrich your understanding. Okay. Then the next one is, then you become more skillful. Skillful in the sense that it's not only fluency, and you can move to other areas, and so on and so forth. And so I haven't come to that yet. I haven't come to the second stage yet. Okay, my learning of calligraphy was in kindergarten in St. Mary's Church in Hong Kong, with a very small brush, and I still remember that, with a very small box of ink, very smelly, and that is what I. But I learned a lot from this experience. I'm sorry I'm overrun. Our learning is not only about knowledge and skills. 3 years ago, we have an advocacy group, Educate 211. We talk about people's quality in 3 dimensions. Capability is about knowledge and skills. Attributes is about how to deal with people, how you deal with things, and what is your attitude. And then, but if you have good capability, good attribute, you can be a bad guy. The world is full of such people now, right? Then you have values. Where comes now? Capability normally comes from curriculum, now more from media. Attributes come from experience, real life experience. But values come from enculturation, family's influence, peer influence, teacher's role model, school culture. How you deal with the student will happen a lot. But now I have to be honest that a lot is mitigated by the media. Right? And may I end with one simple story? I'm full of stories. There's a very famous school principal in China, in Shanghai, Liu Jinghai. Many of you know him. He started school about 15 years ago, promising he will only admit the weakest students from the 32 primary schools in Shanghai. He is running a middle school. I said, why do you do that? He said, one day my daughter, who was 5 years old, came from kindergarten, said, Papa, we have 6 idiots in my class. How do you know? Teachers told us. So he believes that students do not perform well. Sometimes it's due to our perception, not due to their own ability. This is how the university is also transformed. Our library has 4 floors. 2 floors of them have become learning commons. This is a new building of learning commons, and all the learning commons will host about 3,000 people at one time. It's learning. It's not about reading. It's about learning, and so on and so forth. Thank you.